This Memorial Day weekend is all about remembering the stories. For all the families who lost loved ones in service to this country, we honor you, we honor them. It's no small thing. Freedom for us is like breathing oxygen. We're so used to it that we take it for granted, but we get a chance to worship freely together, and that came at a cost. And so we're very grateful for those who laid down their lives for the sake of our freedom. It reminds us of somebody else, doesn't it? One who laid down his life for us. So today is all about remembering our stories. I think one of the biggest challenges in our faith is that we have this spiritual amnesia that happens all the time. A weird thing happens. God shows up in a big way in our lives, and we're like, on to the next thing. And we sometimes forget just how far God has brought us. But I think the power of living a meaningful life, a faithful life, is found in the remembering of our story. And listen, we are wired and shaped by stories. Stories define us. It's how we make meaning with one another, right? We sit around the campfire. We tell stories. Just yesterday, I was spending time with family, and we're telling stories. Same stories we've been telling our whole lives. But also some new ones. Like even yesterday, Karen was like, 22 years of marriage, I'm still learning things about you and your family. Like, how is that even possible? But we tell stories to remember. Remember those who came before us, to be reminded of who we are. It's meaning-making for us. And you know this is true I see this in the sermon a lot, right? So I'll be blah, 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 talking, and then I'll say, let me tell you a story. And you guys are like, like you lean in a little bit more. You're listening a little bit harder because that's how we're wired. And it's no wonder that Jesus taught using stories, using parables, so that we could remember and make meaning. They're so powerful, and yet it's a part of us that, I don't know, when it comes to faith, we sometimes switch it off, and we're like, well, what has God done for me? And, oh yeah, He's done a lot. But we experience story even down to our DNA. So Brené Brown, in her book, Rising Strong, talked about the science behind story. Said, hearing a story, a narrative with a beginning, middle, and end, causes our brains to release cortisol and oxytocin. These chemicals trigger the uniquely human abilities to connect, empathize, and make meaning. Story is literally in our DNA. And don't we know this? Because everybody uses stories to sell us something. Every marketer, everything, it's all about, why do you think influencers work? Because of story. We think they're so wonderful, and they share a story about how they bought the new chapstick. And I'm in, And when I was a kid, this really showed up. So how many kids of the 80s, children of the 80s? God, aren't we the best? It's not even close. Anyway, one of the things that we had growing up really emphasized this idea of story, and that was choose your own adventure. How many of you were into the choose your own adventures? Yeah, baby. Those were awesome. And if you're unfamiliar with choose your own adventure, this is how it would go down. So you pick a book, and it'd be like, some spy thriller. And it'd be like, okay, so now you get a chance. You walk through the door, turn to page 68. Leave the door closed, go to page 33. Right? So you had a say in choosing how the adventure would play out. And then you'd go, okay, walk through the door. Okay, you have been shot. You're dead. And dang it. So you could go back to the other page and you follow on. Choose your own adventure was awesome. But there was something even better that came out in that same glorious decade. The Never-Ending Story. Everybody, come on. That was awesome because it was the story of this little kid who actually shaped the story as he went. Like the story and he were intertwined somehow. And we just all thought this was so cool. Now, as ridiculous as this sounds, this may be one of the best parallels to faith that you can imagine. Here's why. We have a story that began long before we entered it. Its meaning shapes our story, and we shape it too. We have a part to play. The narrative has been formed. God's story has been formed. We know the beginning and the end. We're in this middle where we actually contribute to the story. The story shapes us, and we shape it based on how we live our lives. God's relying on us to get to the end. We are part of the adventure. This is the life of faith. And really, the breakthrough happens when we start to realize, how does the big story of everything fit into my story? And why is that important? What does that mean for me? Why should I remember my story? This is all an incredibly important part of faith. And that's why when we read Scripture and we read the stories of the faithful that came before us, we start to make connections. Okay, well, that's how they fit into that story, and I can kind of see how this fits into my story. I can learn from their stories to understand my own. It's all about the power of the story. So, in this part of the story, I'm actually going to continue where we left off. For the last month, we were talking about Moses. And Moses, he never gets to enter the promised land. 40 years in the wilderness. He sees and does a lot of things. He does not get to go into the promised land. His successor, Joshua, is the one that gets to go in. Now, just imagine for a second the pressure that Joshua's feeling. Moses is the guy. Moses led us out, parting of the Red Sea, all the cool stuff that happened. That was all Moses. Moses had this special relationship with God. There was nobody like that. And now I'm the one that's supposed to take them literally into the promised land. No pressure at all. Do you think Joshua felt like he was as good as Moses? There's no way. In fact, in the beginning of Joshua's story, in the book of Joshua, we get God telling him like on repeat, be strong and courageous, be strong and courageous, be very strong and courageous, be strong and very courageous, be strong, like dozens of times. Why? Because he wasn't feeling strong and courageous. He's like, I'm not the guy. That guy died, and now it's just me. This regular guy. And maybe this speaks more to our faith even than Moses does, because I think we feel like, it's just me, regular guy. Right? Regular woman. Regular person. Like, I don't expect big things from me. I'm not like that one over there. The night before Joshua was supposed to cross into the promised land, which wasn't the end, by the way. It was the beginning. But as he's getting ready to cross into the promised land, God lays out exactly what he's supposed to do. He says, okay, when you cross, send the Ark of the Covenant with the priest first. The Ark of the Covenant, just quick reminder, Indiana Jones, anyone? All right, good, we're there. Ark of the Covenant had the 10 Commandments in it. The idea was you're leading with God. God goes first. It's showing your trust in God. He gives all these instructions about how you're supposed to do that. And it's going to happen. You're going to be able to cross the Jordan River. And he doesn't say exactly how. He just says you'll be able to. So Joshua says, okay, and he starts getting everybody ready. He starts getting them excited. He said, tomorrow you're going to see the Lord do great things. And you always feel him saying, I don't know what those things are, but he's going to do great things. God's going to show up. And this is how he does. This is Joshua chapter 3. Joshua told the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you. Joshua said to the priests, take up the Ark of the Covenant and pass on ahead of the people. So they took it up and went ahead of them. So when the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. Now the Jordan is at flood stage all during harvest. Yet as soon as the priests who carried the ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap a great distance away at a town called Adam in the vicinity of Zarethan, while the water flowing down to the Sea of the Arabah, that is, the Dead Sea, was completely cut off, so the people crossed over opposite Jericho. The priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stopped in the middle of the Jordan and stood on dry ground, while all Israel passed by until the whole nation had completed the crossing on dry ground. What does that remind anybody of? Yes, exactly, the Red Sea. Why would that be significant for Joshua? Because that's how God worked through Moses. That's good. That was the right response. Put his hand up to answer. Who was that for? Well, I'm sure it was for the people to see. God's still at work, even though Moses is gone. But imagine what it meant for Joshua. Even ordinary me. I didn't even do anything special. I just listened to what God said, and God did this miracle, this amazing thing, and we're able to cross the Jordan. I think in this little moment, we learn so much about our story. Here's why. So we ask, how does Joshua's story teach us about our story? The first is when you're at a crossroads in your life, lead with God. What do I mean? Sometimes we have Red Seas to cross. Sometimes we have Jordan Rivers. Sometimes we just have a little creek. Whatever the crossroads is, whatever the decision point is, we have to decide, I'm either going to keep going straight and find a way, or I just need to reassess everything else. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start with God. God goes first. God, I don't know what you have planned here. It feels like you're calling me to do this thing. I'm going to leave it in your hands. And if it's not supposed to, the waters won't part. I lead with you, God. So I think in our life, when we come to a decision point, just a very practical advice that we get from Joshua, first is just simply to assess. Okay, Jordan River, got to cross it somehow. This is the issue in my life. I got to figure out how to figure it out. And for a lot of us, listen, a lot of you are we're all incredibly capable, right? So we take it upon ourselves usually. Okay, I got to cross this Jordan River. I'm going to figure it out. Which is fine. I don't think that's like a sin or something. But I think we miss out on, if we don't invite God into that process, we may end up with a result that is nowhere near as good. Or maybe God's telling you, yeah, that's not the one you want to cross. Go down a little further. It's a little easier to cross there. Right? Why wouldn't we invite God into this process? So first it's simply assessing. And then it's listening. Okay, God, I'm listening for what you want me to do. How do you listen? Well, you got to pray. You got to talk to God. Otherwise, how are you going to know what God's telling you? When I was growing up, my father had this distinct whistle. He could whistle really loud. But it got to the point, because I'd been around him so much and I knew his whistle, we could be anywhere on planet Earth and I'd hear that whistle. I'd be like, oh, it's Dad. Dad's here. Literally, I'd be at football games on the field, and I'd hear him whistle. I'm like, oh, yeah, he's sitting over there somewhere. I don't know how else it works, other than if I don't spend time with God, I can't recognize his voice when he gives me the instructions. I have to be listening. How do you spend time with God? It's truly not rocket science. It's pray, read your Bible, get together with other Christians. If you've been in small groups of any kind, that's a start. Because that's a great way to simply just come up for air and be like, okay, guys, I don't know. I feel like God's telling me to do this. This is the issue. What do you guys think? And it's important to do that with people of faith who are also tuned in to God. Because oftentimes God will speak to you through them. Like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. That's all part of the process when you're at the crossroads. But then, at some point, okay, seems like I'm supposed to cross. God's telling me to do it. I'm going to trust he's going to show up. I don't know how. He's going to do something amazing because I don't know how I'm going to do it. I'm just going to trust that God's going to show up. I wanted to share a couple of examples. I thought it'd be appropriate to tell a couple of stories. The first is, this service in this room didn't always exist. We started over in Webster Hall, and in order to figure out how to put it in the sanctuary, because we had outgrown Webster Hall, we had to figure out, how do we retrofit the sanctuary to accommodate a contemporary style of worship? There were a lot of things that had to get done to make it possible. One of them was we had to extend the chancel here so we had enough room for the band and everything else. That's a picture of what it used to look like. We had the furniture here, and this is where it ended. And so it was a lot less real estate for people to stand. So it was like something like right here where the wall is. We knew one of the projects, we had to bring stuff out. We had to put shades to control the lighting in here. We had to put in a sound system. All this stuff we had to do, right? As you can imagine, if anybody's been in church more than 5 minutes, you know it takes a while to make decisions. Maybe sometimes there's a teensy bit of conflict. And let's say, or a difference of opinion, let's say. We went through I mean, it was some of you who were there during that time, you know what I'm talking about. Some of you on staff during that time know what I'm talking about. It was a wild ride. It was a wild ride to get there. And I remember the first day of demo when they were making the chancel and they broke it apart, I came in and I had the worst buyer's remorse. I'm like, well, my gosh, I've ruined the church. They're going to hate me. They're going to kick me out, you know. It was all part of a process. We realized we had to do something to make sure we could continue to grow. We had to do something to accommodate the people God was bringing to us. We didn't know, and so we came up with a plan. Okay, God, is this really from you? Yes, from you. And then we just had to trust that it was going to work. We didn't know it was going to work. What if people came in the sanctuary and they're like, we'd rather go back to Webster Hall? It was possible. There were actually some who did feel that way at first because it was different. God showed up. God showed up. 1998. I'm a single guy working as a youth pastor, living on peanuts. I was actually living in the attic of a church member. She was so kind. She had a kid in the youth program, and I needed somewhere to live. She goes, "You can stay in my attic." Awesome. So, no, it was awesome. But the thing about the attic was I couldn't fully stand all the way in it. So I don't know why I have back problems. This is great. Thank you so much. No, it really was. It was great. And it was a time in my life where I was traveling the country and I was leading music. I was doing worship for churches, for youth groups, for camps. And I was supposed to go to this camp across the state. And I was in a bad spot just emotionally. I was very depressed. I had always wanted to be married and to have a family, and it didn't look like it was going to happen for me. And, you know, I was driving a free car that someone gave me, and it's exactly what you would think a free car would be. Worked about as well. You know, I had a guitar and like a trash bag of clothes. Like it was that stage. And I didn't want to go be part of this camp. I just wasn't feeling up to it. And I felt God reaching out to me and saying, "You need to go." And I'm like, "I don't want to." Like, you need to go. It's only like 2 weeks away. You can't just not go. Then they got to find somebody who's going to come in and do it. You're going to let there's like a few hundred kids going on this show. You can't just not do it. I'm like, all right. So I hop on to the Pennsylvania Turnpike, where I proceeded to hit traffic like I'd never hit in my life. There was a really bad accident. I was on the actual turnpike for, I think, 3 hours. Stopped. Like everybody's out of their cars. It was one of those. And I get to the school where we're all staying late, and I missed dinner, the staff dinner, which I was so mad because it's free. So I get there, and I'd missed it. And there was somebody else, one other person who had missed it, my wife, Karen. That's how we met. We were both late. She was coming from California. I was coming from... What if I had not listened? I didn't know how God was going to show up. I don't know how God was going to give me enough. I didn't know what God was up to. I just trusted. God's saying, do this. I don't know why. I don't really feel like it, but I'm going to do it. This is, I think, where Joshua's story meets our story. You look, you assess, you listen, and you just trust. Okay, I don't know how. I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to move forward in faith. That's one of the biggest things I think Joshua's story tells us. Let's keep going. When the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, "Choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priests are standing, and carry them over with you and put them down at the place where you stay tonight. In the future, when your children ask you, 'What do these stones mean?' tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever." I think the other thing that we learn from Joshua's story is we've got to share our story with our kids, with the next generation. We've got to make sure that they understand how God has worked in our life. It matters. Hey, just think about Memorial Day. The purpose of Memorial Day, a memorial is only as good as its ability to inspire gratitude. This last spring break, I think I talked about this. We were on the big college road trip. We started at the Lincoln Memorial, which is so incredible. And you go there and you feel the inspiration and the gratitude. And then we ended the trip at the Gettysburg Memorial. And as we're driving around, we were listening to the audio of the tour. And, they're telling us what happened at each field, and you drive around and stuff. Some of you maybe have done that before. But it was day 8 of the road trip. So let's just say my family was not as into it as I was. Dad, how many fields are we going to look at? I'm like, you don't understand, you guys. History could have been changed if just one person didn't do their duty. Just one person. History could have been changed forever. Like, don't you know how important it is? Yeah, like, we'll buy the DVD. Like, do we have to? Please, let's go. And I'm like, okay, we'll go home. But listen, memorials inspire gratitude. But not just that. That gratitude, hopefully, changes how we live. Think about an extreme example. You're a child and you're rescued from a burning building. Someone runs in after you, saves you. How would you feel about that person the rest of your life? You'd be doing anything for them. Hi, you guys have dinner tonight? We'll bring you, we made some ziti. We're going to bring it over. Like everything. Is there anything you need? Do you need money? What do you need? What? You do anything because you're so grateful. Gratitude should inspire us to change. It should affect how we live our life. We're so thankful that it changes how we live our life. Now, of course, the extreme is that Jesus Christ died for our sins. He went into the building for us before we ever knew that he did it. We didn't even know there was a fire, and he had saved us. Our gratitude should show in how we live our life. Okay, God, I'm going to listen to you. You've more than earned it in my life. I'm so thankful. Show me what to do. Show me what Jordans to cross. Help me to trust in you. I want to do right by you because you did so much for me. Remember God's past faithfulness for whatever's next and live in that gratitude. Again, sometimes when we're going through hard times or going through challenges or a crossroads, we forget how God brought us through dozens and dozens of other crossroads. And part of it's just remembering. Remember your story. God showed up before. He's not going to let you down. Can you imagine? I always think of this like the 3 U's. Here's what I mean. Let's say you today went back in time to when you were young. Some of you are young and you're like, yeah, I'm there. Others of us are not, so we can do this exercise. Go back to when you're young and just give you like one piece of advice. Right? I'd have so many questions. Younger me would be like, do I get married? Do I have a family? Am I happy? Do I have a job that I like? Do I have all these things? And current me would say something like, you're going to go through stuff that'll be hard, but it's going to work out. It's going to work out. It's going to be all right. Think about what sort of confidence that would give you if you knew it was going to be all right. Or if future you came to see you today and gave you that kind of confidence. I think faith is like this. Faith is to be lived in 3 tenses. We are so thankful because of what God did for us in the past that we trust he's going to take care of us in the future so that we can live in the freedom and joy of the present. Faith in 3 tenses. The next thing I think Joshua reminds us of is to share our story with the next generation so that they can know of God's goodness through us. Again, we've unpacked all of these stats before. We know that young people today, Generation Z, the under 21ers, are the least faith-based generation so far. But we also know that it's largely because they don't know the story. In fact, Gen Z is the most open to hearing about Jesus out of all the generations. They might declare they're atheists, but it's because they just simply don't know the story of Jesus. We've got to share our story with them. What good is this faith or all these wonderful traditions if there's no one to hand them to? That's why, here at Tower Hill, it's just like a huge focus we have. It's always about the next generation. How do we help them get to know and love Jesus? Beginning in baptism, all the way up through the ages and stages. How do we do that well? And then I think another thing we learned from this moment that's important to remember is that God's timing is not always our timing. Joshua spent decades in the wilderness before the promised land. Don't be discouraged if your promised land crossing doesn't happen immediately. Sometimes I've discovered God's waiting on me. That maybe I'm still in the wilderness because there's a lesson or there's something I need to learn and be equipped with that I'm just not getting or not paying attention to. Because if God gives it to me before I'm ready, I'm going to squander it. I'm not going to be prepared for it. Maybe God's waiting on us. But don't be discouraged. I don't know if God's timing was ever my timing. I always want what's next now. Right? I am so wired for Netflix, dude. The episode ends, we don't even do the credits. On to the next episode. But if we're not careful, we might think that our spiritual life should operate like this, or that God should operate like we're binge watching our lives. And it's not how it works, and it's okay. Don't be discouraged. Just keep trusting. Keep leading with God, and it's going to work out. When I think of Memorial Day and all of the sacrifices made for our freedom, it's hard not to think of the ultimate sacrifice. Because history would have been changed if just one man didn't do his duty. And I'm so grateful for what he did for all of us on the cross. I just want to live my life accordingly. In gratitude, we remember our story so we can go forward in faith. Brothers and sisters, I want to encourage you, remember your story. Amen.